Hi, I'm Eric.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay.
Well, this is still recording.
I know.
Okay.
Okay. Alright, how do you want to start it though, for real?
Okay, just ask me questions.
Okay, I'm gonna start.
Okay.
I'm just gonna start.
Okay.
Okay. So, what is the Bible?
The Bible is like a recorded text of words that I believe is like God-breathed. So it's written by people, but inspired by God. It's a text that shows us God's love and grace and his wrath and anger, and it's a good model in how we should live our life. It's divided up into two main parts, one being the Old Testament and the other being the New Testament.
So what makes those two different?
The Old Testament is a collection of books that mainly focuses on the ancient Israelites. Yeah, the New Testament is about Jesus, I guess, like about his birth and his death and his resurrection and how the church is supposed to act from there on in.
So it starts at the birth of Jesus?
Yes.
Okay. And what language was it originally written in?
Well, the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. And Genesis 31:47, Jeremiah 10:11, Daniel 2:4 through 7:28, and Ezra 4:8 through 6:18, and 7:12 through 26. Yay! The New Testament was written in Greek.
Can you talk again about the different sections of the Bible? Like, how is it separated? Where does it start and where does it end?
Well, Old Testament is the first section of the Bible. It's before Jesus came. The first section of the Bible is called the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. Those books kind of like talk about law. They talk about the beginning of time, like how God created the earth and stuff, and what his intentions were. And they talk about a general history of the Israelites as they progress and with the struggles they had. Sections is like the historical books, which comprises of 12 books, which are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Uzzah, Nehemiah, and Esther. They're called historical books for a reason, because they, again, kind of talk about like the history of the Israelites and how that worked through. And like, as you read through them, you can see God teach lessons to people through as the history progresses. Then the third section is called the Wisdom books. This section is comprised of 5 books, which are Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. These books are generally used to portray knowledge and wisdom. They generally give advice and tell us how we're supposed to live our lives. They're very poetic books. And then the 4th section of books is called the Major Prophets. They include Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And the main reasons they're called Major Prophets is because, well, nothing special. They're just big books, and they're bigger than the next section of books called the Minor Prophets, which is, it composes of like the final 12 books in the Old Testament: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These books are called Minor Prophets not because of their significance or their importance, but because they're small books. And that's like the Old Testament. And then I guess the New Testament is all about the coming of Jesus. The Old Testament kind of touches on and prophesies the coming of Jesus, and like the coming of of Christ, and the coming of God's Son. He's 100% man, 100% divine, and the New Testament touches on that. And yeah, it's divided onto, again, several different parts. The first parts are like the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the first 3 books of the New Testament, and they're known as the Synoptic Gospels because they're very similar together. They share similar stories, they share similar writing, similar order. There's John, which is separated because it doesn't follow the same storyline, shares different stories, and is also written very differently as well. And then after that is Acts, which parallels with Luke. It's the second book. It's like part 1 and part 2. Acts is part 2, and Acts kind of talks about how the church progresses and what the early church did and how it became what it was.
So does Acts happen after Jesus has left?
Yeah. So Acts happens after Jesus dies and is resurrected. Jesus comes at the beginning of Acts, talks to apostles, but like soon after leaves in chapter 1. And then it kind of tells a story about like apostles. It mainly focuses, the last half of Acts mainly focuses on Paul and his transformation from becoming Saul to Paul, who the beginning was persecuting Christians. The end, he was God pretty much showed up and was like, "What are you doing?" And he was blinded for a while, and then he became Paul, and then he went ahead and wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, which then kind of goes into the Pauline letters, which are letters or Pauline epistles, what Paul wrote to different churches, pretty much calling them out on their crap. That's a word I can use. So like explaining like how the churches should behave, telling them what they're doing wrong and telling what they're doing good and praising them and stuff. And these books includes Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. Then there are other epistles which are written by James, who wrote James. John wrote, again, his own gospel and Revelation. Which then moves on to Revelation, which is the final book of the Bible and is the only apocalyptic book in the New Testament. Other gospels touch on apocalyptic nature, but mostly just Revelation is the full book about it. John wrote Revelation from a dream he had, and he interpreted that dream and wrote it down. It talks about end times and the second coming of Christ. It often uses imagery and is a very poetic book. This is again the only apocalyptic book in the New Testament. So I guess that kind of talks about all of the different books in the Bible so far.
Go for it.
Oh yeah, okay. Also, that books that aren't included that I forgot. Okay.
Try that again.
I also forgot to mention that John wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, which epistles at the end of the Bible, pretty much. Also, another book that I didn't mention was Jude, and Jude wrote that as well. As an overview, the first few books of the Bible is like the Pentateuch, which is creation and different stories and stuff that lead up into what Moses wrote. And then what am I talking about?
Where does the Bible start and where does it end?
Starts in Genesis and ends in Revelation.
Wow. No, seriously.
Okay, so it starts off in Genesis, which is in the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible that Moses wrote, and it speaks on creation, and then moves into the historic books, which touches on history, and then moves into the prophetic books, which leads up into the birth of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, which then covers into his death and resurrection. And then the final books of the Bible are mostly letters talking about how different churches should behave and stuff, which follows up into Revelation, which is the final book, which is an apocalyptic book, which is based on a dream John had. So
okay.
Yeah.
So do you believe the Bible is myth or declares the truth?
Well, I believe that the Bible is truth. Again, as I said at the beginning, it's God breathed, so like it's what God inspired other people to write. So I believe that the Holy Spirit really had a hand in influencing what was written, and a lot of prayer and thought went into it. So yeah, it's definitely not myth, it's truth.
So then, if it's true history, where did all these stories in the Bible take place?
Well, from what I believe, I think the Garden of Eden took place in what is like in the Middle East, and in a country now known as Iraq. Most of the Old Testament takes place in northern Africa and the Middle East. It eventually spreads all the way up to southern Europe, which is now known as Italy, and it spreads as far east as Central Asia.
Okay. Well, great. I think that's it.
Oh, okay.
Right? Oh, genre. Shoot.
Biblical genre.
Okay, so if all the Bible is true, then what would you say is the genre of the Bible? Are there different genres? Is it one type of writing?
No, there's several different kinds of writing. Especially in especially in the wisdom books, I would say that a lot of it's poetry. So like if you read through Psalms, all of them are songs. If you go to like Proverbs, if you go to Proverbs, you see that like a lot of it is poetry. There's like similes and metaphors throughout it, and just pretty much talking to you about how you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to live your life. Then there's like other books in the Bible that, like, if you go to again, Genesis is a very poetic book, and the first few books of the Bible are literally just different. It's stories passed down from person to person, and that's how their culture was. So and it was written eventually by Moses. Then you move on and you just like see like the historical section of the Bible is just like explains the history of what happened and stuff. So yeah, that like I would say like that's a historical narrative. Then you move on to like the prophetic books, and those are kind of like a historical narrative as well, but they mostly explain the lives of the specific person writing each book. They're almost biographies or testimonies of how each person lived their life and how God worked through them. And then you get into the New Testament, which are Gospels, which is basically biographies of how Jesus lived his life and what happened, and each person's individual idea of what happened from what they saw. And then you move on from there and you go into like the letters. So like again, these are the letters that Paul wrote. They're letters, so that's I guess the literary, like that's the biblical genre, I guess, is like they're letters to churches. And then again, Revelation is a poetic book as well, interpreted from a dream. So yeah, I'd say like there's many different genres, and I think I touched on most of them. So yeah,
Great.
Cool.
The end.
The end.
The Bible by Eric Davis.
Do you think I should add anything?
Maybe just give 2 more sentences about like what the Bible is to you.
Yeah, I guess in the end, what the Bible is to me is a God-inspired book of how I'm supposed to live my life. How God demonstrates His grace and His wrath and His understanding, and like how He moves in a way, and Him trying to show us in human words how He works. And I think that in that it's good to know, and it's a basis of how you're supposed to live your life in a way, and a lot of it is a demonstration of grace. Yeah, especially like throughout the New Testament is like Jesus' examples of how we're supposed to live our lives through His parables that He told, and I guess that's it. So
great.
Cool.
Okay, done.
Yeah.
Yeah.